After adding Saquon Barkley to an already juggernaut offense, the Philadelphia Eagles have solidified their skill position group as a top 5 unit in this National Football League season. We're talking all that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, everyone, to yet another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We thank our everydayers for tuning in, whether you're listening along, if you're watching us here on YouTube, make sure you like, share, subscribe to keep the pod alive. Thank you for tuning in yet again. I'm your host, Gino Camilleri. If you've joined us for 1,300 episodes, we're getting close to 1,400 episodes as a duo. We thank you for being fans of the Philadelphia Eagles and everydayers here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. And today's edition of the show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And to get started on today's show, Lou brought up a very interesting topic yesterday. If you're going to look at the 10 guys on this Philadelphia Eagles roster that you have to put a stamp on them and say they have to perform to a level that you can win because of. When I was doing that experiment, my mind instantly went to offense. Because we saw what the ceiling of the offense was last year. And we saw how a bad defense can really hold them back. But we saw how great that offense could be, especially when you go back to the Super Bowl against Kansas City. But like the Cold War, the Philadelphia Eagles are not sitting on their hands. Who is the Eagles Russia if the Eagles are the USA in this whole scenario? Kansas City, let's say? Or heck, there's 15 teams right now. If you look around the National Football League, that can contend from a skill position standpoint with the likes of the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's why when you see Howie Roseman add a Saquon Barkley, and you see these really good teams, like heck, we're going to go down the list. In Miami, they just added Odell Beckham, and even a young team like Tennessee just goes and add Tyler Boyd to their trio. This isn't a league where you can win with just a quarterback, just a running back, and just one wide receiver. If it isn't evident looking at the last couple Super Bowls and the teams that participated in them, even the teams that were on the losing side of them, you have to have a deep arsenal. You have to stockpile your nuclear arsenal with elite football players. And this isn't like the Cold War where it's just the Eagles and just the Chiefs. Doing this experiment and going through this exercise, I don't know why I call it an experiment. All I'm doing is looking at depth charts and just stating the obvious here. The Eagles are in an arms race. It is clear. Teams around the National Football League are understanding that as much as the old cliche goes, that defense wins championships. Kansas City, Philadelphia, these teams that are towards the top of the league, are they just sitting on their hands and trading away A.J. Brown, wink, wink, and not signing Saquon and just going with Kenneth Gainwell? No, they're not only adding A.J. Brown and adding Saquon Barkley, they're giving them record-setting deals. And why is that? Is it just because it's fun and this is a Madden-type scenario? No, this is a necessity. Take a step back. Go watch the great documentary on the Cold War on Netflix. How so much of it is behind the scenes and just like these proxy battles. And that's what personnel is. It's a proxy battle between you and your opponent. The real war happens when you get on the field. But right now, you are in a war to compile as many good skill position players, and by good, I mean great to elite skill position players, to at least have a chance to put up 35 points a game, which you're going to have to do if you want to beat Patrick Mahomes each and every week. The Kansas City Chiefs, folks, they're the USA and Russia in this whole scenario. Everybody's trying to get there. They're the back-to-back world champs. They own this whole thing. They are the cream of the crop right now. And teams are seeing that. It's a copycat league. Were the Eagles ahead of schedule? I'd say to a degree. Let's take a step back like 12 years ago to the years of Mike Vick and Shady and Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson. I think that was the first iteration in this 2000s decade that we have seen, these 2 decades we've seen in the 2000s rather, of the Eagles really getting the point of, oh, we can win if we score a lot of points and have really, really, really good football players. Because it took them the entire 2000s outside of 1 year with T.O. to figure that out. It was Donovan and Brian Westbrook or Deuce Staley. And then we're going to hope Todd Pinkston and Jeremy Thrash and the rest of that group can step up. No, that's not the world that wins Super Bowls anymore. Yes, defenses can really help, but man, San Francisco, they've arguably had one of the best defenses in the Super Bowl in the last 5 years, probably twice, you could say, in their 2 showings. And what did that get them? 0 Lombardi trophies. Offenses win championships in today's day and age. It's crazy to say out loud, but it does. You have to score more points than the other team. Football's an easy sport. We overcomplicate it. And I don't want to overcomplicate this discussion that we're going to get into. And when we come back, we're going to get into 18 teams, and they're 6 deep at the skill positions and where the Eagles stack up. Because in today's day and age, you got to have a bunch of these guys that can put the football in the end zone. So come on back as we continue on this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast. As we continue to roll along, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. Folks, I was on my heels last night, seeing my Avs come back down 3-0 against the Stars. I live bet them down 3-0. They win it 4-3 in overtime. There's only one place that I put that wager and all my wagers in. It's over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And that could be on a parlay. It could be on an over-under. It could be on a prop. Whatever your cup of tea is, you can get $150 back in bonus bets if you hit on your first $5 bet. If you're a new player over at FanDuel, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, and here at LOE. Welcome on back, everyone, to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Everydayers, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? I hope not. Do you hate having to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, if you do, make the switch today to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels. That part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And as we continue to roll on, our discussion here today is focused on the idea that it is an offensive-minded league. Who are the 10 most important Eagles right now? You can make the case that all 10 lie on the offensive side of the ball. But at the same time, you know the defense has to step up. But I went through all 32 depth charts here. And I picked out the quarterback, running back, obviously, and then the top 3, sometimes 4 pass catchers for these teams. And man, are there some dang good offenses in this league. And in the final segment, we'll kind of see where the Eagles stack up. But man, going down, it might, on paper, make you salivate a little bit at some of these other teams. And I'm sure the hosts of the other Locked On NFL shows are really hyped up to talk about these guys. So there's going to be some surprising teams that I left off. The Dallas Cowboys are not on here. I'm not going to say Brandon Cooks, and I love the guy, but Royce Freeman and Ezekiel Elliott at this point are really a lethal trio to add in there with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. Like, those are two really good players. They still got to get paid by their owner. But right now, that's not one of the top 20 units in this league, in my opinion. And let's go on here. So we'll start with Washington. You have Jaden Daniels, Austin Eckler, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, and Zach Ertz. A young Chicago Bears team. They just drafted Caleb Williams. They signed DeAndre Swift. They have Khalil Herbert. They have DJ Moore. They trade for Keenan Allen. They draft Rome Odunze, and they have Cole Kmet at the tight end position. They have to, though, because they have to compete with Detroit and Green Bay. Heck, Detroit, you got Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Montgomery back there in that backfield with them, Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. Green Bay has Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, A.J. Dillon. Heck, I had to add all three of those guys in there. You got Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, and Tucker Kraft at tight end. That's a scary young team. Atlanta, they finally sign a cornerback and get Kirk Cousins with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier in that backfield. And you got Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney, who you added there, and you trade for Rondell Moore. Is that one of the top 5 units in this discussion? I would say no, but that's still a really good NFC South team where I left off Tampa and New Orleans as an honorable mention. They're right on the cusp, but I picked 9 from the NFC and 9 from the AFC. There are some good teams here, folks. I mean, go out to the West. You got 3 teams in San Fran, Seattle, and the Rams, and I even kept Arizona off of this list. But, I mean, we know what San Fran has in Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey back there, and Debo or Ayuk. One of them is probably going to get traded, but still, they draft Ricky Pearsall to add with George Kittle. And Seattle has the same unit that they had last year in Geno Smith and Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. You got Njigba and Noah Fant. The Rams, they still have Hall of Famer Matt Stafford with Kyron Williams and Blake Corum in that backfield, throwing to one of the best duos in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp with Tutu Atwell and Tyler Higbee. That's just the NFC. That's just the NFC. And you got honorable mention teams, like I said, in New Orleans and Tampa and Arizona who are just on the cusp. And Dallas has good quarterback play. You could throw all of them in the discussion for teams that are going to compete for playoff spots. But man, look at those 9 teams in the NFC and how deep they are. Let's go to the AFC. Let's look at the other side of the aisle. Miami. Goodness. Building the track team there. Tua, Raheem Mostert, Devin Achane, Waddle, Hill. They add Odell Beckham. Baltimore. You got Lamar. They add Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews. Dude, the AFC North is crazy good too. I had to leave Pittsburgh off this list, and they're right there. But Cincinnati with Burrow, Zach Moss, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Mike Gesicki, Cleveland, take him or leave him with Watson, but still they brought him in to compete the highest guaranteed contract ever at the quarterback position. Chubb, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Njoku. The AFC South is no laughing matter anymore. Heck, Houston's got CJ Stroud with a backfield of Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce. With pass catchers and Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell, that might be the best trio there is. Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Christian Kirk, and Gabe Davis. They draft Brian Thomas Jr. They have Evan Ingram, who they paid at tight end. Tennessee, don't sleep on them. Will Levis going into year 2. They signed Tony Pollard to bring the Memphis boy home. They add Tyler Boyd. They signed Calvin Ridley away from a divisional opponent. They have DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to the Hall of Fame. Indianapolis, you got a bazooka on the arm of Anthony Richardson. Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, they paid all this money to. They just drafted A.D. Mitchell, who I'm sure Shane Steichen is going to get the best of. And you got Jelani Woods as a tight end. And then the giant in the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, Isaiah Pacheco, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice. We'll see what's going on with him off the field. But on the field, Super Bowl champion, Hollywood Brown, and Travis Kelce. Just outside of those 9 teams, Buffalo with the quarterback play that they have. They lost some playmakers, but you still got Josh Allen there. The Jets have loaded up. Pittsburgh's loaded up. Folks, I know all I did was read a bunch of names just there, but that's what the Cold War was. You're just reading numbers on paper. That's what this is. This is a personnel Cold War on offense. Teams are 6-7 deep. 6-7 deep. I mean, I left very good players off of this list. I left very good teams off of this list. And what happens if the Eagles trade A.J. Brown, which was never going to happen because of this reason? You're taking a step back. When every team's getting better on offense, you were going to take a step back. How crazy would that have been? Howie Roseman sees the world that we are living in. Offense is winning championships these days. Defense, you have to do enough. But offense, you win because of. Now, where does the Eagles stack up in all this? I still think they're in the top 5. I know I got a little excited there, but you might agree or disagree with me. Come on back as we wrap up the show and discuss where the Eagles stack up in the grand scheme of the National Football League in this arms race, which we call the NFL. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game, and I got to talk about it. In Monopoly Go, you could team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go, it feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free over at the Google Play or Apple Store. Game on. Gino Camilleri wrapping up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. As our everydayers know, thank you for tuning in to get this Wednesday edition, which came after the Tuesday edition, which came after the Monday edition, which came after the Friday and Thursday edition, because you get 5 episodes each and every week. If you want to get the episodes directly to your phone or directly to your YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe. By the way, only 35% of you are subscribed to the show. Let's get that number to 100. We're approaching 1,400 episodes. We're not going anywhere. We hope you aren't going anywhere either. But enough of me rambling. Let's talk about where the Philadelphia Eagles stand in the grand scheme of this arms race, which is personnel when it comes to offense. Now, I listed in the prior segment 18 teams, the Philadelphia Eagles being one of them. Far and away, they're a top 5 unit, in my opinion. Are some of these teams a year ahead of schedule, like Tennessee? Chicago, probably. Green Bay, we have to really see what they can do for a full season. We know they're on the up and up. Same with the team like Indianapolis. Seattle, they're right on the cusp. And then you got those teams that they've been competing for the last 3 or 4 years. And a lot of them are the same. One being the Eagles. Of course, Kansas City. I think Baltimore is right in that discussion. Cincinnati, if that whole team is healthy, watch out. Houston. I think they're going to be a problem and faster than a lot of people think. But in terms of the NFC, It's Philadelphia and San Francisco still. I would put them as a 1A, 1B. You can make the argument either way. Do they have the upper hand when it comes to the play caller aspect of it? With a new play caller in Philadelphia, there's going to be a lot of question marks on the table, a lot yet to be seen. Or does a team like Detroit, who has that continuity element to them with a lot of the same guys returning there, much like Philadelphia, can they be right there and compete with you? In Atlanta, you know they're going to want to compete with the Kirk Cousins of the world, and they brought him in for a reason, which is crazy that they went out there and then drafted Michael Penix, but they were going to compete with him. And the Rams, same thing. These teams are going to be right there, blow for blow, when it comes to playing time, when it comes to what happens on the field. The games you play against those teams that I listed, you got to find a way to win those games. And they're probably going to come in the playoffs, especially against the AFC teams. But in the NFC, you got to assert your dominance. You have to show that you are not just a paper tiger. That adding Saquon to an already legitimately good offense is only going to make them that much scarier. With two 1,000-yard receivers in A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. And a generational running back in Saquon Barkley. And still, when he's on the top of his game, Dallas Goedert is a top 5 to 7 player at the tight end position. And Jalen Hurts, the tide that lifts all boats. If he performs to an MVP level, there's nobody on this list that I named outside of Patrick Mahomes that is stopping him. It comes down to the quarterback position. But it also comes down to the guys around him. DeAndre Swift wasn't enough. Miles Sanders wasn't enough. What do? They upgrade to Saquon Barkley. Jalen Reagor, clearly a mistake. What do? Draft DeVonta Smith. Oh, Quez Watkins isn't a clear number 2. What do? Add A.J. Brown. That's what the Chicagos of the world are doing. That's what the Green Bays of the world are doing. That's what the Eagles started doing when they realized they weren't to the level of the Kansas City and the Bills of the world at the time. Were they at the forefront of this type of movement 12 years ago? Absolutely. Absolutely. Watch the Monday Night Football game against Washington. That was an offense that was ahead of its time. Right now, you're on par with a lot of these teams. But if I had to give you a top 5, I go Kansas City. Oh, man, it's so tough. I have all the numbers written down here, but you know I change on the show if you've listened to the show at all over the last 6 years. I can't rank them. I'll give you Kansas City, and then I'll give you the rest of the top 4. Philadelphia, San Francisco, Miami. See, and I'm gonna change this last one too, aren't I? I think Detroit's really freaking good. And I think Green Bay, you know what? Green Bay. I think Green Bay is legitimately 8-9 deep on offense. And there's guys like Bo Melton, who I didn't even throw into the equation for them. I would put them probably at number 5. Kansas City at number 1. Eagles, San Fran, Miami, all in the same tier. I think Miami wins the East. I still think San Francisco is going to win the West. It's going to come on the back of these high-profile offenses. It is a Cold War, and there's not just one team. There's not just 2 teams. There are legitimately 20 teams with some studs. I'm talking 5 to 7 guys that are good to great level football players, if not elite. The Eagles are one of them. Where do they land in that equation for you? For me, I still think they're a top 5 unit. I put them right in that second tier, right below Kansas City, right with Miami, right with San Francisco still, and I put Green Bay at number 5. Let me know what you think. I hope you had fun with this one. I hope you had fun listening to the Locked On Eagles podcast each and every day. And if you're one of those people who likes to watch along and you want to watch along to some other sports, well, Locked On has you covered. They've launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free TV channels app on your Amazon Fire remote and stick, whatever it is called these days. They've changed it so many times. I still have the old Amazon Fire Stick that I use, but it does have the Amazon Fire channel. And all the apps have YouTube, and they have Spotify or any of the places you're listening to the show. And we thank you for tuning in each and every day. We will be back getting into a discussion position by position, breaking down last year, how things went, how they're going to move into 2024 at each of these positions, who's going to make up for some of the slack left behind, who's an upgrade, who's a downgrade. But that'll do it for us today on this edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I thank you for tuning in each and every day. I'm your host, Gino Camilleri, signing off. As always, you can catch me on Twitter at GC24_football. Catch my co-host at DiBiase LOE. Follow the mothership at Locked On Birds. Subscribe to all the Philly shows over at the Locked On Sports Network, Locked On Podcast Network, and make sure you go watch the Locked On Sports Today show over at YouTube. But that'll do it for me today. I'm Gino Camilleri. As always, fly Eagles fly, and let's go Birds.